paint a little bit of picture about how jiu-jitsu was trained in the original academy?
So Carlson was a fanatic about cockfighting. A lot of people didn't know this, but that was his inspiration. He just loved competition. Everyone who knew him described him as someone who was fanatical about competition. He just loved like that, warrior versus warrior, and that's what he wanted. So much so that for him to have an army of warriors inside his gym, he didn't even charge most students. This guy was doing it for free. He died broke. Carlson died with a few $100 in his account. He never had open property. He never had money. All the money he made in his fights, and there were many fights where he made big money, went to the family. Right when his father died, he didn't keep the inheritance. He kept nothing. He was not interested in money. He was just interested in getting it done. He just wanted war. He wanted a competition because and a lot of people from that era would say, oh, he was not so technical, because he was already, in his 50s, 60s. And it's easier for you to call someone not technical when they're not in their prime, as you age. But that to me, first of all, it's not true. I have a picture of Carlson doing an omoplata in 1954. I've never seen an omoplata before the 1980s. Like in 1954, this guy's doing omoplata in an MMA fight. You watch his fight with Valdemar Santana. He's hitting Uchimadas left and right. Find me a judoka that can hit an Uchimata left and right. Go, I'll wait. Even most judokas can't do it. Even elite judokas can't do that. So this guy was very technical. So that's BS. But it's not even that important. That part to me is the less important part. The important part is that he created the environment for jiu-jitsu to evolve. Now, there's a myth in martial arts. I call it the genius myth, right? Or the myth of the genius. It's the idea that this really smart guy is going to sit back in a corner, watch people train, and then he's going to go back home and think about all these positions, and he's going to tell his students what to do next day. It's a myth. It's a myth. Anyone who believes that, I'm sorry, you don't understand cockfighting. I don't want to offend people, but it's simply not true, right? I've been in fighting my whole life, and I'm going to tell you, innovation comes from accidents and improvisation. It doesn't come from people thinking of the comfort of their bed or on the edge of the mats. It's just nonsense. It comes from improvisation, right, and accidents, trial and error. You go to war, you make mistakes, you learn how not to do something, you improve on the technique incrementally. The more people in the environment, the more competitive the environment, the stronger the selection pressures. So at the original Gracie Academy, they had like 4 or 5 people at the end of the day training amongst themselves, right? Some selection pressures, but not a lot, right? And imagine me and you on an island, just training jiu-jitsu every day. We don't even know what jiu-jitsu was, but, someone gives us a tablet with this rule set, the IBJJF rule set, right, for example. And we end up rolling there for 40, 50 years every day. We end up reaching the conclusion of a De La Riva. People don't have to teach us De La Riva, but we would reach that conclusion over time, But it would take us a long time for us to reach a lot of the conclusions we have today, decades, centuries, because it's only 2 people, right? So a small group with very small competitive pressure is not going to lead to a lot of evolution. However, if you have a large group of people with very strong competitive environment, that's going to accelerate. So instead of an island with 2 people, now imagine an island with like 500,000 people competing every weekend. All 500,000 of them. What kind of selection pressures do you get? You accelerate it tremendously, right? And this is true in biology. This is true in jiu-jitsu. So what Carlson did is he created that environment. He created an environment for people. Like, you're welcome. Everyone's welcome. It's democratized, but in a very sort of aristocratic kind of way. Like, you have to be a Spartan to survive in here. If you're like, oh, I'm going to cry because I'm injured, get out. This is why, like, a lot of people that were softer didn't make it, because it was not an environment for soft people. There's a reason why jiu-jitsu didn't, grow to all demographics in the 80s in Brazil. It was a practice for Spartans. You're going to have to deal with the intensity. Don't be a bitch. Like, you didn't get to cry, complain, like it was a tough man kind of world. And that's what he wanted. That's what he wanted. But that's what jiu-jitsu needed, to gain credibility, the credibility that I make a living from today, that we're all enjoying that credibility because of those guys. We didn't do it. They did it, right? And the generation that preceded Royce, those were the guys that created that sort of like combat mentality that jiu-jitsu needed for it to grow around the world. Saying, we have the greatest martial art in the world. That I call the second wave generation. Those guys did it, right? And I think that's the key factor here, is like that environment for evolution to take place was created by Carlson, and that's his greatest contribution. It's not insignificant, man. It's very important, because without that, there's no evolution. And then without evolution, you think Royce would have won? You think that I would be here? Like, I mean, you think we would have enough missionaries to colonize the world after Hoist brought jiu-jitsu into prominence? No way. We would have had. I mean, so the seeds were planted by Carlson back in the 70s and 80s. I like to say that he created the recipe for the cake. And then, you know, in the mid 90s, Carlos Gracie Jr., Marcelo Siriam, Andre Fernandez, the IBJJF guys, they created the oven for the recipe for the cake to really grow to its proportion. But when I'm walking around Jiu-Jitsu Con, and I was thinking about that, man, I was like, this is Carlson's vision. This is what he had envisioned all along. This was his vision for Jiu-Jitsu. Democratize it, open it up. You know, open it up to everyone. We need everyone practicing. We need more tournaments. He was fanatic about competition. This guy was running illegal underground tournaments in Brazil because at the time you couldn't run tournaments unless you had green light by the federation, who was run by Helio. So Helio was very controlling. He didn't like things outside of his control. Carlson would really, like, literally get together with other gyms and run underground tournaments because he felt that there were not enough tournaments going on in Rio at the time. So like, the more you learn about the stories, like, man, this is the guy who did it. We're here because this is the effort to democratize it, to expand it, to set on a completely new evolutionary track was created by him, you know? And if you talk to his students, man, they're like, yeah, we know that. We know that. They've all been saying it all along, but, you know, I guess, you know, it was just not something that most of these guys would tell their students this, but it never got out there. So I think the book has that purpose of trying to get that information out there, man. Like, this is, you know, there's no such thing as the history of jiu-jitsu without Carlson, you know, especially the brand of jiu-jitsu that we're practicing today.